Hello, welcome to Off Leash with Eric Prince. I'm Mark Serrano. The world continues to shift in the wake of the election of Donald Trump as the 47th president. And Donald Trump, true to form, is already using leverage and his power and his political capital to shift dynamics in the world even before he takes office. Let's start, for instance, with Israel. This headline I want to share with you, Eric, in a couple of quotes. Trump repeats warning to Hamas to release hostages soon or face consequences. So, as you know, weeks ago, the president posted on Truth Social a very stern warning to Hamas that says, you will release the hostages before I take office January 20th, or face severe consequences. In a press conference the other day, at his warning, and he said, as you know, I gave a warning that if these hostages are back home by January 20th, all hell is going to break out. And he basically described a recap call that he had with Benjamin Netanyahu, where he said that they had a very good talk, and he reassured him that all hell is going to break out if Hamas does not release his hostages by January 20th. So, Eric, you just returned from a trip on the ground in Israel. Perfect timing for us to get your perspective on where things stand with the hostages, this threat from Donald Trump, ceasefire talks. Tell us what you learned.
Well, right after October 7, they had the original attack. They had about 250 hostages that were taken. They're now down to 100. Of those, 64 are believed alive. 36 are still the bodies of deceased hostages. You'll see a picture that we put up, but you can see it's a wide range of ages, from old people to literally two very young children, babies effectively. And they've even kept five workers from Thailand who were working a farm, and they're still holding on to them as hostages. It's ridiculous, it's unnecessary, and it's as great as the IDF did with the pager operation in their effort against Hezbollah. It's not been great in Gaza. The IDF walked into the exact fight that Hamas wanted to have. Very conventional, a lot of bombing amongst civilians, a lot of civilian casualties, and Gaza is pretty much annihilated. Yet the hostages, at least 64 of them, are still alive, held all through the area that they do not control and can't get access to. I was pretty direct in my comments that I wish they had listened and done a drilling and flooding program, because it really would have been, if nothing else, it would have been like squeezing the tube of a toothpaste, rolling up the area and completely denying sanctuary by flooding it. Because again, Hamas does not want dead hostages, because dead hostages are really of no value to them. And so, yeah, thank God Trump was elected, because he could be the catalyst to actually change the dynamic and get those American and Israeli citizens that are held hostage freed. Still, Israel as a society has to figure out how are they going to live with Gaza, with the Palestinians, because they cannot put them back into a non-existent, flattened disaster of an area to live in and expect that the same resentment and hatred doesn't boil up and continue the cycle of really unproductive violence. I visited up along the border with Lebanon, because as we've said before, saw it firsthand, they have had real problems with a lot of the low altitude, cheap drones still coming across the border. A friend of mine, in a real contrast to the same kind of cartel of big military industrial complex, because even Israel has one, he literally 5 months ago went to an Israeli Air Force museum, dragged out an old gun system, put it on a trailer, put effectively a Tesla battery on it with a new radar, a new camera system, and a new fire control system algorithm that you can run from a laptop. And he is shooting down drones with this newly modernized gun system. It was really impressive, really inspiring. He did it with his own money to show that it could be done, and now he's finally under contract, scratching and clawing his way into being a defense prime in Israel. But the threat is very real. Even though there's supposed to be a ceasefire, there is still stuff that's coming across the border. And I was uh, I was actually in a CrossFit gym on Monday afternoon near my hotel, cranking away with a headset on with plenty of Metallica blasting. And between intervals, I looked out the window and I saw all these Arab women running around in a group, running around the corner of a park. And I thought, that's amazing. They must have some kind of fitness club that they're exercising. But I turned around and there was the gym attendant furiously waving his hands at me saying, missiles inbound, get to the shelter. Well, I did not get to the shelter. I finished my set. But sure enough, it was a Houthi missile fired all the way from Yemen at Tel Aviv. The Israelis shot it down, and the wreckage damaged some apartments in Jerusalem. So, still a very real threat. They're still taking fire, and they need to find a way to finish this, both in the north and certainly with Hamas. And again, the IDF walking into the exact fight that Hamas wanted to have with them. And as I talked to a lot of the other engineering officers, they were also very, very frustrated at the rate or the lack of rate of progress that they'd experienced. And they confirmed that it was some senior generals and very much in cooperation and not wanting to offend the Biden Pentagon to do something as innovative as what we recommended with a drilling and flooding program, which would certainly have avoided dropping explosives amongst civilians. So it was an interesting, insightful trip. The drone threat remains very real, especially the small, low altitude stuff, and it's something that the U.S. military is thoroughly and completely unprepared for.
Well, interesting that you say that the Houthis were lobbing missiles that way when the U.S. and the U.K. just recently, in the last few days, struck some Houthi targets in Yemen. And I look at that and I think, what in the hell took you so long? I mean, why now? It's fascinating to me, especially when there are Americans among those hostages in Gaza that Joe Biden hasn't even really barely even mentioned throughout this crisis,
Never
almost
acknowledged.
15-month long crisis. And one of those hostages, by the way, is Eden Alexander, a 20-year-old young man who was in a hostage video just weeks ago. His parents, the Alexanders, they live in Tenafly, New Jersey. They are in touch with me through an intermediary, sending messages to President Trump. Obviously, they were uplifted by the president's warning to Hamas, but they are gravely, gravely concerned about their son's health. He's in captivity, even though he's a 20-year-old male. He's in captivity for almost 15 months, and that hostage video just broke their hearts because they're really, really now concerned that he won't make it to January 20th. And so that's why I think this warning from the president is a signal that the way of doing business for the past 4 years is over. And it's very reflective of 1979 into Ronald Reagan's inauguration, 1980, when he was inaugurated in 1981, and sent that signal to the Iranians who held hostages there. I see a lot of parallels to that.
Yeah, an old mentor of mine, Richard Allen, was Reagan's first national security advisor, and he went and met with the mullahs, representatives of them, in Geneva after the 1980 election, and he passed the message, a similar Trumpian message from Reagan. If the hostages are not released by the time Reagan makes it from the Capitol to the White House, we're going to turn your country into a sheet of glass, or back to the Stone Age, or something very clear and unmistakable in what the outcome would be. So yeah, Hamas and their financial backers and their paramilitary enablers all need to be prepared to feel heat. And, you mentioned U.S. and British made strikes in Yemen. It's pinpricks. It's nonsense. And there's two things a military commander does: coordinates information and releases energy. The cost of energy, meaning the cost of finding it, targeting, getting the aircraft or the missiles overhead and putting energetics onto the enemy so they feel pain has gotten so grotesquely out of whack. I really hope the Trump administration allows the private sector to innovate and to figure out how to solve these problems cheaper, better, faster, because for the last 20 years, our military could not have done a more atrocious job at actually bringing resolution and deterrence and credibility to American concerns and threats by our leadership.
So, from your perspective, Eric, being on the ground in Israel, even being in contact with hostage negotiators, is that warning from Trump going to have its intended effect? I mean, is Hamas now worried about what Trump will do to the point where they will actually agree to a ceasefire that allows Israel to continue to keep the IDF on the ground in Gaza?
I don't know about the status of IDF in Gaza short term, medium term, or long term, but I do believe they take Trump's threat of greater action very seriously and of consequences far up the financing and facilitating chain of the people in the Middle East that make Hamas possible. So but I feel terrible for the hostages. They're kept underground, devoid of vitamin D, no sunlight. Literally haven't seen. It's like being in a black hole for a year and 3 months. Terrible. And I'm sure some of the females are young and attractive. There's been stories of persistent and consistent rape from some of them that are being held. So it is a terrible nightmare, and it must end soon.
Yeah, and fascinating to me though that with your recommended solution for flooding the tunnels, here we are 15 months in, and it's whether they applied your technique or some other technique, Eric. How in the hell does Hamas still have safe haven underground? That blows me away.
That's exactly right. And for the engineers I talked to, they said, well, we tried it. Yeah, okay, sorry. Trying it with a 12-inch or a 18-inch pipe, not doing it. I'm talking 2 and 3 meter pipes. Literally turning section by section of Gaza into a duck impoundment temporarily. I don't care if you find the tunnel or not, the water will always find the airspace to flow into. It would have made it impossible for them to remain. It would have destroyed their arms caches. It would have prevented them using tunnels for maneuver. And it would have slowly flushed the hostages to the surface because Hamas doesn't want dead hostages. So it's the IDF has managed to rescue a few. There were some that were certainly in early on a hostage swap and a hostage and prisoner swap, but this is a disaster, and I, the same kind of blocked lack of innovation that we've seen in the Gaza campaign, I fear is also pervasive across U.S. military leadership. And we have not learned those lessons from the GWAT, and we have not rewarded and promoted innovation and risk taking, and we haven't fired and cleaned out the kind of bureaucratic rot that is clearly endemic throughout the U.S. military. And so, if we assume that we're going to win the next battle, that is an exceedingly dangerous assumption.
Sure, and you outlined all that in your article, Too Big to Win, noting the history of the neocons over the
Yeah,
last 40 plus years, which lays it all out. And anybody from our off-leash viewers ought to take a look at that article. We'll put it in the description on this episode, so you can get a link to that article. It's you've got to really digest it. It's this history of the neocons being in charge of foreign policy and military affairs, and where it's gotten us and where it hasn't gotten us. And so that's why one of the big differences, aside from this warning from Donald Trump to Hamas, the other big difference that we're going to see is Donald Trump's got Netanyahu's back, and he's going to tell him, get the job done, whatever it takes. And to that end, Netanyahu's not been held back by the Biden administration at all, which we saw in Syria. Tell us, Eric, what's the latest that you've heard about Syria and HTS taking over, and any new developments since Assad was taken out?
Sure. Look, I'm hoping that Trump leans hard on Hamas to release the hostages, but it also cannot completely release Netanyahu to just pound on the Palestinians, because that's all it's going to do is a further compounding, and will repeat the same level, the cycle of hatred, violence, and carnage. And that's not a sustainable solution either. Now, what happened in Syria next door was a clearly organized, supported Turkish intelligence, Turkish special operations enabled rapid assault on the Syrian Arab army, leading to Assad fleeing the country, leading to, it appears, the Russians losing their bases. Tartus was their key seaport on the Mediterranean, Latakia, their key air base on the Mediterranean. That was Latakia, is what they would land when flying a fully loaded cargo aircraft carrying weapons that they were flying to Africa. Now they don't have that. They have since shifted 1,000 plus troops to Libya, so which is an even worse outcome, giving them significant basing right in the middle of the Mediterranean. What the mood in Israel was fairly positive about Assad being gone, the Iranians, the Shia influence in Syria being gone. I am holding judgment, because the HTS, the leader, the Julani, I think they definitely got him a new PR guy, because he trimmed his beard, he put a suit on, he's saying all the right things. But just a couple of years ago, he was a Al Qaeda, ISIS, full on jihadi, and I don't see him being some enlightened leader taking. He's not another Lee Kuan Yew of Singapore taking Syria forward. I think it's exceedingly dangerous, especially for the Christian population in Syria, who have been there for 2,000 years and survived. So it's the jury's out. The Druze, which is a kind of an Islamic sect, along the border, have already asked to be annexed into Israel, because they view their future as being safer with Israel than under a Sunni radical. The Israelis also moved to Mount Harmon, which is the highest point in that area. I think it's almost 10,000 feet. Bibi went up there and did a little press conference amongst the snow already, because again, I guess first rule in warfare is own the high ground. And from there, I think it's just 40 kilometers from Mount Harmon to Damascus itself. So I think it's important to remember the borders of the Middle East, of the Levant, were drawn by cartographers, Sykes and Picot, a Brit and a Frenchman. Really, when the Ottoman Empire collapsed in 1924 after World War One, there was random lines drawn on the map to define these countries, Iraq and Syria and Jordan. And it really ignored how people were living together, who chose to live under what flag and under what religion and faith and tribal chief. And so you're going to see a significant reordering of that. Stay tuned to Jordan. Stay tuned to the whole region of what may happen, because remember, Jordan has a significant Palestinian population, even though they have a Hashemite king. King Abdullah is a good guy, good ruler. Actually, of all the rulers in the Middle East, he is the one that actually traces back to the Prophet Muhammad in terms of royal legitimacy in their mind. But it's the sands of the Middle East are shifting, and they're being reshaped by men with guns and vehicles. And you'll see it accelerate, I would say, in the next year or two. And Turkey is a big driver of it.
Well, to that end, Turkey being a big driver, President Trump sort of sees that clearly. Speaking of Erdogan, at his press conference the other day, the president said Turkey is very smart. He's a smart guy, and he's very tenacious, referring to Erdogan. And he added that Turkey had done an unfriendly takeover without many lives being lost. I can say that Assad was a butcher. So I am interested, Eric, is there any way to determine what that relationship between Turkey and HDS will look like now?
I think Erdogan is setting the stage for a resumption of the Ottoman Empire. He has been very public in talking about that. He has shown maps of how he views the Middle East going forward. to include parts of Syria, parts of the Kurdish parts of Iraq, parts of Bulgaria. Um, they've got significant presence, multiple military bases in Libya now, significant military base in Somalia. So he is definitely reestablishing that reach of the old Ottoman Empire. And remember, the Ottoman Empire grew out of the Byzantium. So you had the Eastern Empire of Rome, which finally fell, and then that pivoted and became Islamic, and the Ottoman Empire ruled much of the Middle East for hundreds of years. So stay tuned because maps are drawn on paper; they're not set in stone necessarily on land. So Turkey's economy is not fantastic, but they are backed significantly financially by Qatar and the gas revenues that they enjoy from the Far East.
And I know they've got a massive military. I mean, do you we obviously Erdogan's sights are on Syria. Uh, do you expect he's going to keep peace with Israel? What should we expect there?
Well, the Israeli military is the most potent one in the area, but Turkey has a significant one of size. And
Hmm.
remember, they're still yet a NATO member. There's actually Incirlik Air Base.
We forget
There's
that, don't we?
we have
Yeah.
U.S. nukes.
Mhm.
So it's going to be a difficult one for Trump team to negotiate because Erdogan kind of smells opportunity in the whole region, and I think he's going to push hard until he's made to stop.
So, Eric, just to exit here on our update on Israel and the Middle East, what are your give us some reflections? You spent some time there. You did some interviews there. What are your last thoughts about the way life is in Israel right now? It seems like it's still on edge because they're still being targeted, but there's some light at the end of the tunnel.
Still on edge. I think it was yet a stark reminder of assumptions. Assuming that your signals intelligence is so awesome and your knowledge of the area is so complete that nothing can happen to you. And yet they were very rudely reawakened to those realities that the enemy always gets a vote. And I think it's a sharp reminder for the U.S. military that what was passed is not necessarily prologue, and discipline, initiative, readiness, merit, lethality are terms that matter. That is what Secretary Pete Hegseth must be pounding on every day and cutting out the massive amount of dead wood we have in the Pentagon so that the entire military is ready to fight tonight and not when we try, but when the enemy has already been moving on us, we have to be ready to respond with massive lethality if the deterrence fails. And so far, there hasn't been a lot of American deterrence that's with credibility over the last few years.
Yeah, agreed. And Pete Hegseth says his whole focus is on lethality. And I think between him and Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy with the Department of Government Efficiency, we can hopefully see a new day for our military preparedness in the U.S. Last word to you, Eric.
Well, we first of all have to get a Congress that will actually vote something fiscally responsible before we can even dream of actually reforming this runaway Leviathan. It's a republic if we can keep it.
Well, and I am encouraged by the fact that Donald Trump, with the help of Vivek and Elon, spoke out against this continuing resolution nonsense that Speaker Mike Johnson was pursuing. 1,547-page bill that, by the way, protects this agency for another year at the State Department that's responsible for censorship against American citizens and against conservative media. Um, and thank goodness the president put his foot down and said, hell no. And Mike Johnson pulled the bill so that hopefully we get a very skinny CR with a lifting of the debt ceiling under Joe Biden so we can change this for good starting in January.
Look,
Amazing.
how do we get such loser Republicans that embrace and support the swamp I think it's time to name and shame the appropriators that wrote all these bills and their staffs and call them out so that there is every bit of pressure, personal pressure, professional pressure on them to just knock that nonsense off.
Oh, I agree. And candidly, I think we are about to enter a new era in terms of accountability with Congress because Elon Musk is not afraid to say, I will finance the person who's going to primary you if you don't stay on track with the Trump agenda.
Yep, discipline matters.
Awesome. Well, look, that's it for this episode of Off Leash with Eric Prince. Don't forget to visit our sponsor at unplugged.com/offleash. Thanks for joining us. I'm Mark Serrano. Until next time.